Okay, so PPM number 11, a little later in the day than I have been. So I pretty much so far made uh, read meditations in the early morning. And this is the latest one I've done so far. It's 8:25 EST. I kind of a busy day. I'm finishing up a paper that I'm presenting at Chicago. So later this week, I'll be reading from Chicago, the Windy City, and also had my radio show on, The Dead Zone. So, in fact, I finished editing this paper, which is on music making philosophy, and I would note that that paper, if I haven't already said it, I'm describing the work I'm doing after Being and Learning, which is, first this writing that I'm reading every day, then the publication of it in an edited form as Being and Learning, and now the work after is sort of working out of the genre that I kind of think that I worked out in these experimentations. Now, on that note, I want to say that I definitely had some inspiration from many different places when undertaking this work. So, and today, as I was walking back from the library, I thought to myself that I'd rather be known for a way of writing or a form rather than what I'm saying. Um, so I'd rather be known for how I'm saying things rather than what I'm saying. But in fact, what I'm saying is conveyed in the how. So for me, obviously, it's an issue of style and the substance is in the style, so to speak. And I have inspiration from various places. One of those is Luce Rigore. And my son, and here, this is the beauty of having little kids around. They really remind you of the naturalness of random, the random, and and spontaneity. They kind of live and dwell in that space. And so he just uh, came down the stairs today with two books. One of them, a book by Werner Jaeger, this third volume of this work he did called Paideia. And coincidentally, I bought that book almost to the date. It was like February the 15th, 2004. And then, so it was the day after, 2 days after the project got underway. And he also brought down this volume of Luce Rigore's 2B2. And Rigore is definitely one of my inspirations, but she came later for me. So I only knew, and actually reading her in 2007 and 2008 motivated me to really get going on editing the writing that I did between 2004 and 2005 and get it out there. It did sit on my shelf for a couple of years before I felt it was now the time was right. And so reading a rigor. So I'm calling attention to all this, not just because of the randomness of children and they're showing us of that, as well as all the different inspirations I get, but because specifically from this book that my son brought me, the very beginning in the prologue, it's this kind of lyrical form. It's written in a lyrical form. And I was reading it, and she writes and I think it's speaking to where I am right now in the beginning part of the meditations, which has been focusing, and yesterday in particular, I was talking about emptiness. And so a couple of days ago, I talked about the silencing of the juridical voice, and then yesterday, I built on that idea of talking about being emptied by um, the nothing, being brought into the nothing. And actually, it was an interesting play. I wanted to mention that to talk up the question, how is it with the nothing, drawing us into the nothing because it empties us, is I thought a kind of interesting circle that's happening, right? So that heeding of the saying of the word nothing draws us into a place or modality of nothingness, which is really openness or emptiness. But Rigore says something, and she says, despite the song, no, let me back up. She says, it is the time of the unfinished, of wonder. Life walks on tiptoes. Despite the song of the birds, silence persists. Is this not perhaps how what grows preserves its future? I thought that was kind of cool. So, the idea that there's a silence that persists, and perhaps this is the way what grows preserves its future. She's really interesting in terms of her preserving of the gap and valuing reticence. Okay, so moving ahead then, the PPM11, originally written this day, February the 23rd, 2004. And the last thing I wrote in the meditation from yesterday was a play on the term vocation, or its Latin root vocare, calling. And I said evocative speech is a calling, vocare, which enjoins us in emptiness, the condition of learning where we are dressed in our steadfast openness. In heeding the saying of nothing, we are made vacant. The call, vocare, of the first question enjoins us in Jesu, vocare. Okay. Our rejoinder to the enjoinment of the first question is a mood. Our response to the call of being is a silence that is described as calm and peacefulness. This silence is an expression of the mood of attunement, der Stimmung. How can a mood be a rejoinder? In what sense is silence a rejoinder, a reply to the question, how is it with the nothing? Again, it is crucial to underline why the attunement we described is called contemplation, and thereby an expression of a kind of thinking that is a matter of comportment, attitude, conduct, and bearing. The essence of the comportment of attunement is steadfast openness, and we have thus described this comportment as teachability. The bearing of teachability is expressed in the silence of attunement, which Heidegger calls the will not to will, or Gelassenheit, the serenity of letting be. This mood here is not adequately captured if we mean the emotional moodiness, as when we say someone is in a bad mood, or more generally when we say a person is moody. With these expressions, we are usually describing temperament, and specifically a manner of being that is erratic, unpredictable, and even uncontrollable. However, these expressions are not entirely outside the domain of our present discussion, because they denote a kind of flexibility and the capacity to be moved by circumstances. If mood is understood to be the capacity of flexibility, then it relates to the meaning of the term as it is used in the lexicon of musical performance. Here, temperament refers to the adjustment of tones of an instrument to fit the scale of any key, especially with those instruments that have a fixed intonation, like a piano. Similarly, mood in music describes the mode, or the possible ways of arranging the octave or the form of a scale. The key here is that mood, as a mode of temperament, is a way of describing the result of an adjustment, or to push the point, a tuning. Thus, in this sense, the rejoinder of silence is the result of the adjustment of our desire to know. And this adjustment is brought about by the encounter with the first questions, which are received in the form of evocative speech. What is the mood of silence? Where are we when we are enjoined in this relationship with the nothing, and why is this relationship akin to a hermeneutical relationship? We've indicated that questioning is a mode of being, and that first questions in particular take us directly to being, draw us towards a relationship with presencing. Thus, the questioning of the first question and their saying of the said, terms like nothing, tune or adjust us. They direct us. In doing so, we take on a bearing, a comportment, a conduct. Further, we said that when we are drawn into this relationship, we bear up for a seeking, for a learning that is like a sailing before the wind. The tidings of this relationship catch us in the tide, and we bear up, endure cheerfully in this relationship, and sail into the wind. That's how it ends. Now there's an end note here, and I don't have the entire manuscript with me, so I don't know. But I have a suspicion that I made a note there because almost every one of the references that I make to sailing, and there are many, and I build off of the tide, capital T tide, which I've already referred to as a play on the tidings. Remember Heidegger? The tidings of the relationship delivering the message. So the tide then leads to all these sailing references. And the reason is because in the fall of 2003, I believe it was, I have a small sailboat, 14 feet. It's great as a single solo sort of sail, also fun with one other person, but really enjoyed it mostly enjoy it when I'm solo sailing. Anyway, in the fall of that 2003, I had an experience where the current of the tide that was going out was so strong, and it was much stronger. In fact, it was creating its own kind of wind, which was great because when I went out, I was sailing on the Great South Bay off of Amityville, New York. I went flying out, and I thought, oh, what a great day of sailing. But my boat was too light, and the current of the outgoing tide and the wind that was being created by that was so strong that I couldn't come back in. And I spent a good while trying to figure out how to get back in, and I couldn't. And in the end, I ended up having to be towed back in, the one and only time that ever happened. No shame in that, but all these references about the overwhelming power of the tide and the wind in the writing are all very specifically related to that one singular event. Of all the times I've been sailing, and I've sailed this boat many, many, many times, and sailed boats like that many times, I never had such a humbling experience, and never did I fully appreciate the power of the wind and the tide as I did that day. Now, the other thing I would just note is I'm struck by how I moved quickly from the question of introducing mood. That's the introduction. That's the new thing that gets introduced. That I went from talking about emptiness to mood, and then talking about moodiness, and then the mood in terms of music, the mood of music, and then the idea of the possible ways of arranging music through a mood and a mode. And that's kind of coincidental because, as I mentioned in the beginning of this short little meditation film, I just finished a paper on Nietzsche and music-making philosophy, which has been something I've been working on for about 2 years now. Not the paper, but the idea of Socrates, the beginning of the Phaedo. This famous line where he's told, Socrates, make music, and apparently he wrote lyrics, and I'm really fascinated by that. And I don't recall if that event in the Phaedo is discussed in this writing, but it's become really important for me in trying to understand what this writing that I did do could possibly represent. And in that project, I've been sort of imagining that Socrates, in his last days, offered us up a last will and testament with his poetic lyrics, and that would be that he was offering us up a new possibility for doing philosophy that is more poetic than it is analytic, and is a kind of reasoning that isn't necessarily rational, right? So it's closer to the Kantian idea of reasoning as a form of free thinking. And so I was sort of struck by the move towards music that I made here. But the last thing I want to say on this is that, and something I've noticed, is that I move forward and then I come right back to repeat terms and ideas, almost sentences. And it's interesting to see that that was very much part of the exercise of writing the meditation, that it's almost like the daily meditation was a recollection, right? In the sense of recollection, memory, but also recollecting, so a regathering. So as I wrap things up, I kind of go back to the principal terms that have been developed um, the day before or the days before. And so that's something that struck me. So yes, well, that's it for PPM 11, 4701.23.02, originally written February the 23rd, 2004.